Well, thanks so much. It's really a pleasure to be here. We had some technology glitches in the earlier cohorts, so everybody keep their fingers crossed that that things run a little more smoothly this time. However, it was nice to see that we had a plan B, and I think we even have a plan C, so everything will work out. Um, so I hope everyone is doing well, has been enjoying this whole training experience and starting to feel like a infodemic manager, and what that feels like. I'd love to know in another conversation. I hope we get some feedback on how you all are doing and what it feels like. And I hope that I can help you a little bit on that journey and moving you in that direction. So before I start, I just want to say that I'm going to draw on my experiences in working on social marketing and behavior change programs, mostly on USAID funded programs over many, many years. But I want to say that my opinions, any conclusions that I draw, you should consider them my own and not necessarily reflective of USAID. Also, I'm going to be showing some commercial sector examples, some advertising, and I started my career in advertising research. So I always love to go to advertising. I've always enjoyed it. So, but the ads that I'm going to be showing and the marketing examples that I'm going to be showing are for illustrative purposes only. I'm not promoting anything, not trying to sell any products, not making any money off of this. So, all right, with those disclosures, let's take a look at our learning objectives for this session. So I want to take you through and examine some lessons that I think we've learned over many years from social marketing, from behavior change, and crucially from marketing. I think marketing continues to give us lessons, and also from human-centered design. And then let's look at, we'll be looking at how we might apply some of these lessons to design and implement more effective misinformation and infodemic interventions. So I'm going to focus on four key areas. One is positioning design as it's applied to products and behaviors primarily. Secondly, positioning, which is a concept that we don't often hear in public health, but it's commonly used in marketing, and I think it might be useful and interesting. Thirdly, messaging, benefits, and channels, some terms that we're all probably familiar with, but I just want to refresh our thinking about what they really mean and what they can contribute to what we do. And then lastly, stepping into the new behavioral sciences areas with nudges in behavioral economics, that's contributed a lot to the field. And I know you've had some discussions about that, but I'll look at it from kind of a marketing perspective. So if we go back to some fundamentals, the USAID projects, like I said, that I've been working on for many, many years, go back many, many years further, probably back to the 1960s, certainly the 1970s. And over that time, the goal has always been to save lives and reduce deaths from preventable causes. The solutions for those health issues have often come from advances, terrific advances in technologies, in medical technologies primarily. And over the years, many new technologies have come along, but one aspect of our work that's continued to be central is the influence of behavior change and the influence on health behavior, the role of human behavior. And I think over the years, we've really learned quite a few lessons about how to influence behaviors. And we've learned some lessons about mistakes that we've made. And perhaps we've learned a few lessons from those mistakes as well. So you've heard some of these terms before, but I thought I would refresh us in terms of the, what might be called the evolution of terminology over the years. And if I listed all of the terms, we wouldn't have enough slides and enough screen, but a few terms that I'm sure you've heard, and I just want to put in some context. These three at the top, IEC, health promotion, and BCC, are not used as much nowadays. They're older terms, they've gone out of date a little bit. and they focus primarily on information. So how we uh, convey information, and BCC goes a little bit further than information transmission, but also goes on to look at other factors, but they're primarily individual factors, um, which includes knowledge, attitudes, and so forth. Social marketing incorporates a broader spectrum of a broader lens, really, to develop strategies around what they famously call the 4 Ps, which I'll explain in a bit. And social marketing has been defined as drawing from the field of marketing and applied to doing social good. The question, I think, was raised back in the 1950s by someone who famously said, um, uh, why can't we sell brotherhood the way that we sell Coca-Cola? And he proceeded to look at how marketing and why marketing was more successful than programs that attempted to do social good. SBCC is probably a term you've heard a lot. Here, it uses communication technologies primarily, and it goes a bit beyond behavior change communication, the BCC, by including social factors as well. SBC incorporates uh, SBCC and looks at a broader variety of factors and brings in some of these newer disciplines and behavioral sciences. And then, I'll be speaking mostly about social marketing, SBC, as well as SBCC. And RCCE, risk communication, that we use in outbreaks, is more of a real-time exchange of information. And I'm not really going to focus on that too much. So my focus will be social marketing, social and behavior change, and then human-centered design. And human-centered design is really a part of those other two fields. And but it's newer, and it's proving its worth. Well, we don't know in the long run, but it's bringing some interesting tools to the game. Let's say that. So as I said, social marketing famously is known for what's called the marketing mix, or the 4 Ps. And here's a very basic chart of how that might look. And you'll notice the 4 Ps are product, price, promotion, and place, and they circle our target audience. And the target audience we can refer to as the potential customer, the client, really the person for whom our efforts are directed. And uh, whether our audience experiences the product in a particular setting through promotional efforts, and eventually is given an opportunity to obtain the product in some sort of a setting at a given price, and in exchange for, that price is in exchange for some benefit. Now, as we noted above, and I think very importantly, and we need to pay attention to this, that exchange and that benefit needs to be both individual and social. I think sometimes we get lost and we focus on the social benefit, and we try to convince people to do things that are good for society, and we tend to ignore or maybe downplay the importance of providing individual benefits. So SBC, now that was social marketing. Now SBC brings in a whole range of determinants that figure into how behaviors can be influenced. And there are many. There are about a dozen on this page. There could be more if we wanted to detail them out. But here we've clustered them into 3 groups that are commonly used, and that's structural, social, and internal. A colleague of mine, a mentor of mine, Dr. Bill Smith, has famously characterized these 3 categories as fun, easy, and popular. And at the risk of oversimplifying, it's an easier way to remember them, and I'm going to describe them in that context. So social, the ones in the middle, refer to the fact that we're social creatures. We don't make all of our decisions by ourselves, but we make them in a social context based on social influences as well as cultural norms and values. And we call that the popular cluster. Now, internal are those factors that I think we're pretty familiar with, things like skills, beliefs, attitudes, perception, as well as knowledge. But it's not exclusively knowledge. And these are often drawn from psychology and that facilitate or can facilitate the adoption of behaviors. And because we expect these to offer a benefit to the individual, Dr. Smith has called them fun. Fun being a translation of something that offers a benefit that people want or desire. And lastly, the structural factors. These identify constraints in the broader environment, such as policy issues, access, and availability. In other words, is it easily within the reach of our audience, or could we make it easier? Traditional behavior change has tackled the fun part. When we add social to the behavior change, call it social and behavior change, we add in the popular, and we sometimes forget about the easy and leave that to other domains. But there's a lot that we can do in that structural area as well. So now over the years, from the start of, I think I could say from the start of USAID's efforts in the development field, has been to identify new and effective, that is proven technologies, life-saving technologies. And these are some really wonderful life-saving technologies. Here on the slide, you'll see a few that have been around for a very long time, and some of them from the very beginning, like oral contraceptives, condoms, oral rehydration solution, insecticide-treated nets, as well, of course, vaccines. And then over the years, we've significantly added to this repertoire with ARVs for HIV, as well as pre-exposure prophylaxis, and other products. And now some fantastic new medicines for the cure of tuberculosis. So what we found, though, is that offering these products, putting them out there required something more. We couldn't just put them there and expect that people would adopt them, just like that. So we needed to put together essentially that social marketing mix, applying communication so that people would know that the products were there, providing them through a distribution channel, and then offering them at a low price or maybe even for free. And that was the social marketing mix that's been in existence from at least from the 70s, maybe even longer, and has persisted to this day, and it works pretty well. Now, the early models of communication that went along with this tended to be fairly linear and simplistic. I think you heard the term, what is it, information deficit. So that's kind of the model of communication that was used early on. And I have a visualization of what we think it kind of looks like. Something like this. So on the one hand, we have a sender, somebody who is transmitting the information, who is crafting their messages and their information based on the advice of technical experts. So technical experts are saying, here's a great product, or here's the behavior that's necessary to prevent this condition. And please go out and tell people about it, because when they're informed about the product, their lives will be improved. So the underlying assumption here is that the sender is saying to the receiver, I know something that you don't know, and if you knew it, you'd be able to improve your life. So you can see the relationship there. It's a little bit, I don't know how you want to characterize it. You could characterize it in different ways, but the poor fellow at the pole, we kind of like a captive audience. and the old media, television, even radio, and of course, that courtyard in the primary healthcare center often gave us access to these very kinds of captive audiences. So our default model, I would say, could be characterized, I'm oversimplifying a bit, but I think we could characterize it as essentially supply side and rational. Excuse me while I close this door. Okay, cut out some of that external noise. So our default models originally, and a lot of this has persisted over time, you could characterize as supply side and rational. Supply side because products were more or less taken off the shelf. They were givens. They were proven to work, but not necessarily designed for uh, uh, for um, the experience, a positive experience for people. They were designed to be functional and to do the job that they were intended to do. And our communication model was rational. We provided rational information and we assumed that people would be rational in the uptake of that information. So here's a visualization of a model of communication that's been around for a very long time. And I think many of you will be familiar with this. This is called the trans-theoretical model of behavior change. And it assumes basically, it follows this rational model that in order for someone to adopt a behavior, they may start from a lack of awareness. So that's the pre-contemplation. So then with information, with more information, they will learn more about the product or the behavior, then maybe they'll consider it, start finding out more about it, do some information seeking. And then if they're interested, if they feel that it's something for them, they'll take action and hopefully maintain the behavior. And maybe even if they're delighted by it, become an advocate and convince other people about the product. Now, this is a model that's been very useful. However, it doesn't actually correspond to how people actually make decisions. I would say that it's proved very useful in planning and monitoring and evaluation, but it falls short in terms of realistically telling us how people make decisions. There are many instances where this just doesn't happen, where trial precedes knowledge and other things happen. So where do we turn to? Well, behavioral economics has helped us with a newer model that I think it would be helpful for all of us to be familiar with, at least in a basic sense. So the Nobel Prize-winning behavioral economist Daniel Kahneman, who's written a couple of books, he framed the issue like this. He's basically shown that we humans have two modes of thinking, what he calls fast and slow. So fast is what we use most of the time. Fast is called system one. It responds quickly. It's based on pattern recognition, intuition, heuristics, and impulse. It doesn't worry so much about what it doesn't know. It relies on what it does know, especially what it's learned from experience. It's practical, it's survival oriented, and it keeps us alive. We couldn't really make it through the day without system one. System two, it's slower. It relies on rational thought, information search and deliberation to develop better and more informed decisions. System two reads calorie labels carefully. It may read consumer reports. We generally think of ourselves as system two thinkers. For example, now I used to work, as I said, I worked in advertising research and we did a lot of focus groups and other kinds of research. And invariably, so many people would tell us, I'm just not the kind of person who's influenced by advertising. In fact, most decisions that people make are system one decisions. We couldn't get through the day without them. Now, the problem is that public health program designers generally design for system two, not system one. So this creates a bit of a problem, as you might imagine. And let me mention just a couple of instances, and we'll get into it a little bit more. So these illustrations are really just that. They're illustrative. They're not meant to be representative of how we do things, but maybe it'll bring to light how we look towards system 2 in designing what we do when we could take system 1 a little bit more into consideration. So just to give you a couple of examples, insecticide-treated bed nets offer very significant protection from malaria. When they are combined with sleeping under a bed net, they are highly effective. And for many years, going back many years, we've procured them in huge quantities to save people from, from malaria. And being, system 2 thinkers, the procurement folks generally procured them in a neutral color, white. However, in many cultures, white happens to be the color of mourning and is associated with death. So a lot of people really didn't like sleeping under white bed nets, and because what they perceived as a kind of a death shroud. Now it took us a very long time for that feedback to get back to the program managers and then the procurement and supply people, who had to be convinced over a long period of time that we needed something more than white. And eventually, malaria nets were made available in colors other than white. And it turns out that one of the most popular colors has been green. I think it continues to be the most popular color. And green is often associated with health. Completely irrational, but that's the way it is. So now it makes more people feel comfortable to sleep under insecticide-treated nets. So now when Ebola struck West Africa, the safe disposal of bodies was a proven solution that was critical to slowing down transmission of the virus. Now, we had learned, of course, earlier that white was associated with mourning and death, but for some reason, all of the shipments of body bags that were received were initially black. Now, I have to give a lot of credit to these burial teams. It took them quite a bit of time, but over time, they learned to negotiate with the communities, with individuals, with families, community leaders, leaders of faith, to develop greater trust and to negotiate behaviors that would work for the safe and dignified disposal and burial of bodies. Procuring white body bags was one element that led to that success. So, so these workers, I think they closely engaged with the communities they served. They negotiated with communities, and they had to ensure that the bodies of people's loved ones were well cared for and were handled safely. These negotiations helped to ensure that important religious ceremonies could be carried out. And this involves negotiation and compromise between what the technical experts recommended and what communities were willing to accept. It took a while to learn how to do that and to step away from those initial, very technical prescriptive behaviors and negotiate behaviors that would work for the community. So essentially, we stepped away from system 2 into system 1. So what's the path forward? If what offers us the ability to speak more to that system 1 thinking process, that faster thinking process? In these two examples, you might say, well, asking people what they want, negotiating with communities, and so forth. But asking people what they want is a bit difficult because it sets up expectations. And I had a project manager when I worked in contraceptive social marketing, and I said, why don't we ask people what they want? And he said, well, it's really not practical because they're going to tell you that what they want is impossible. They're going to want something that's free or cheap, effective, high quality, available everywhere. The package of benefits that people generally request is just, not practical. So we can supply some of these maybe separately, but asking people what they want is a bit difficult. So, and yet we still want to make sure that we design our interventions for people. We want to ensure that our designs are human-centered. So how can we do that? Well, the whole notion of human-centered design came out of Silicon Valley. So let's quickly look to Silicon Valley and see what they did. These were people, I think they called it human factor engineering at the beginning. And these were the people that were really struggling to take these clunky computers that were very difficult for people to use, and eventually, watch people in laboratories work with these things. And then they recrafted the technology to make them more ergonomic, more user-friendly, so that today you don't need a computer engineer to operate a computer. An iPad nowadays can be operated by a 3-year-old child, and I've seen them do it, and I'm sure you have too. So, and what about this notion of asking customers what they want? Well, Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, famously had said, well, customers don't really know what they want until we've shown them. And if, for instance, if Henry Ford had asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. And that's interesting. So what can people tell us? If they can't tell us what they want, it's our job to maybe design the product to tell them what behaviors they want. What is it that we can ask people? Well, people know what their experience is, their highs, their lows, their pain points. And in these computer labs and elsewhere, when they observed users as they struggled with clunky operating systems, they didn't ask them what operating systems they wanted. They kept tweaking the technology until it got to a point where it delivered a high level of consumer satisfaction. So this is the interface that he came up with in the 2000s. And interestingly, with all that whiz-bang technology and that great revolutionary, as it was called, user interface, the promotion of the product did not really talk about all that wizardry. It didn't even talk about all the things that you could do with it, the apps that you could have or the calculations that you could make. It basically encapsulated it as your life in your pocket. And I think all of us that have a smartphone know how prophetic that statement was. This is from, what, I've forgotten now. I think this is 13 years ago. So maybe 2007, 2008. So then if we move forward 13 years, Apple launches their latest computer, the MacBook. This one again has tremendous whiz-bang technology, an 8-core processor, a super fast chip, lots of things that they could rave about, and a computer that will just do everything for you. And but look at how they promote it. I want you to take a look at this ad, and then we'll take a couple of minutes and in the chat or on Slido, if you can just write in why you think they've taken this promotional approach. What are they really trying to tell us here? Here's the ad.
There's a certain kind of person who doesn't take no for an answer. They don't walk in quietly. They parade in, trailblazing, eyebrow raising, status quo breaking. Grazing greatness, braving hatred, and taking up space. Never got a seat at the table, so they can't sit and behave. They'd rather defy the rules and amaze. There's a certain kind of person who doesn't wait for greatness. They make it.
Okay, so what did you think of that ad, and why do you think what is the approach that was used there, and why do you think they used it?
There's a certain kind of person.
So feel free to drop it in Slido or into the chat, what your general impressions are, and I'll read them out for Anton.
Oh, thanks, Liz.
No problem. What is it that they're selling? So Gwyneth says driving music suggesting progressive people. They're selling computers. And Malik says the focus is on innovators and early adapters. Enrica says you'll be part of greatness. Let's see, what is people putting on slide now? Your uniqueness is you. They're trying to build a tribe. Atsu says emotional benefit of using Apple products. Lisa says being part of a cool community of artists and innovators. And Zaim says a product for all ages that embraces all schools of thought. And
Brilliant.
my favorite one, Abigail says unlocking the greatness that already exists in you.
Yeah, brilliant. You guys are brilliant. Why do you think he doesn't say much about the product? Yeah.
No, well, people say they're selling a computer, but really, are they selling a laptop? Because I didn't see a whole lot of information about the speed and how many USB plugs it's got and its battery life.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing that they spend so much time really crafting an incredible product, going through this process of, technological innovation and, and a good deal of research, despite the fact that Jobs says we don't ask people what they want, they do a lot of research. They prototype, they test, they prototype, they test until they get it right. And what they get right is really mapping against competition for user experience. They really prioritize that, building on top of a very easy to use product that delivers a lot of features, a lot of benefits at a high quality, but they prioritize that user experience. And maybe that's why they do it, because they're looking at appealing to user values, not particularly a sense of logic. They have Apple has, and Mac has a strong positioning in its field. They're seen as a bit rebellious and achievement oriented, and those are the users that they depict. So if you go back to their launch campaign in 1984, which was kind of based on the novel 1984, and they had a woman who was battling Big Blue, and they really kind of carved that niche of being a rebellious, scrappy little product. Now they're a little less scrappy, but they want to maintain that that rebellious spirit that's turned into some of the things that you folks said, achievement oriented, a crowd that you might want to be a part of. And it gives you the feeling that with a Mac, even though they don't say this, but maybe with a Mac, you can do really incredible things like, like Spike Lee and Billie Eilish and people that you might really admire. So is it system 1 or system 2 thinking that they've mostly appealed to?
Feel free to drop your responses in the chat. Antonio says fast thinking.
Yeah.
System 2, system 1. There's a mixed bag. Some people say 1.
It's primarily 1. They've really kind of bypassed a lot of rational thinking and really gone for with that driving audio track and some really interesting celebrity presenters using the product. They really try to bypass a lot of rational thought and just have you sort of imagine yourself in that scene and being that kind of achiever. So yeah, I think they've kind of bypassed the rational to a large extent. Of course, there's some system 2 in there too. So I won't argue with you if you're a Mac user and you think it's you can rationalize why you use it. Of course you can, but this has a particular appeal to that intuitive sense. So let's take a deeper look into human-centered design. So this is how Silicon Valley uses it. Is it something that we can use in public health? So Jobs was a leader in this field, and over the years, it's really been used. And lately, I think, I mean, it came about in the 90s, and then maybe in the last 5 years or so, we've started to use it much more in the field of public health. Marketers have been using it a little bit longer than that, and it's being used for shopping centers, revolutionize the whole shopping experience, as well as health clinic design. So I'm not going to take you through the whole thing, but just to give you a snippet of a particular tool that I think is very valuable, and whether you actually use this particular tool, or I think just knowing that it exists and having this frame of thinking in your head could be useful. So here's someone who runs a design shop. I think she's even in Washington, and she's doing a training on what's called journey mapping. And in her journey map, you see the stickies across the page. And anytime you want to do human-centered design work, and especially journey mapping, you will need a lot of stickies. Trust me on that. You can see them in the bottom right, where we did a similar exercise in, I think that was in Nigeria, and we used even more stickies. So what she's done is she's mapping out the shopping experience, the journey map in a shopping experience. On the left, it'll start maybe in the kitchen with doing a shopping list, maybe what our shopper is going to buy, and then moving through the actions of getting in the car, running down to the store. Maybe it's raining. Doing the shopping, running up and down the aisles, getting the cart, banging the cart around in the parking lot, and then getting back home and maybe unpacking the groceries, putting them away, and maybe enjoying a meal with family and friends. So you map out the basic journey from start to finish, and you define what the start is and what the finish is. And then within that journey, you have users and different segments of users identify what they enjoy about the process, define the whole experience, but then within that, what are the high points and what are the low points? And you can see that on her whiteboard. So the high points might be making the list and imagining, what we're going to, the meals that we're going to prepare and the dinners that we're going to have. And, and in America, Thanksgiving is coming up. So everybody's shopping for turkeys and stuffing and stuff like that. And then there are the low points. Maybe the low point is on a cold, rainy day when you have to go out to the grocery store and you've got shopping bags to deal with, and and parking lots and traffic and those stupid shopping carts, and then running up and down the aisles and maybe not finding everything you want. So you define the high points and low points. And then what marketers do is they also define something that they call touch points, which are all the opportunities along that journey map where we have an opportunity to touch the consumer. It could be before or after via media, radio, television, social media, and so forth. It could be on the road to the market. It could be within the market itself. And certainly markets are well designed to adjust to the shopping experience. And the idea is to identify what are those low points or pain points in the experience and to try to improve those. And then the high points, to identify them, see what people like, and really build on those. So that's kind of in a nutshell one of the tools that are used in an HCD process. And it differs from a lot of other processes in that it prioritizes the experience of the consumer. What do they value? Not what do we think they need or what do we think would serve them well. It really prioritizes their experience. Does it make them happy? Does it make them delighted? Does it give them difficulty? And services, products can be redesigned based on adjusting those pain points and those pleasure points. And in the shopping experience, one very dramatic example is, pain points were those parking lots and shopping carts and even the in-store experience. And one of the newer designs is online shopping and home delivery. So really redefining the shopping experience. Now here's what the entire human-centered design process looks like. The journey mapping happens in number 2 in what is called empathy. What can we learn about the user? How can you learn about what they need, what their experience is of the issue that we're dealing with? In number 3, we ask the question, a very famous question in human-centered design called how might we? And the how might, and it's not one how might we ask a lot of how might we's. And the how might we's focus around those pleasure and pain points. How might we alleviate some of those pain points and design a better product, design a better service that serves that market or that market segment or that consumer group? From that, we create some prototypes, really quick prototypes, test them very rapidly, then refine them. And the ones that are more promising, we scale up and we take out maybe for further testing or for implementation. Now, you might think that because this came out of Silicon Valley, the whole process needs to be high tech, but it really doesn't. We've done this in very low tech environments and in a variety of products and services. And it's being used quite extensively in the health field. Here's an example from South Africa in the launch of the dapivirine microbicidal ring. In the lower left, the ring was, I guess that was South Africa and Uganda. And then in the lower left, some search engine optimization work that was done for the Nigeria Center for Disease Control. So optimizing search results. And then on the right, it was applied to how to increase referrals for TB testing from patent medicine vendors. We knew that consumers went to patent medicine vendors first when they had many of the symptoms of TB, and it was often kind of a dead end where they wouldn't go anywhere else. So how might we make it easier for patent medicine vendors to make referrals to TB centers? So here's some other instances of how HCG solutions are not at all high tech. You've seen these in grocery stores. And it also gives you an idea of how you can easily prototype them. This is the final product, but you can see how prototypes can be done quite simply. And here's one that is very current. We've all learned to adjust our behaviors, and here's a very simple way to create safer spaces pretty easily. I won't get into this in detail, but an exercise that we did in Laos that was also on the low tech side, where we were dealing with avian influenza, and we worked with 4 villages to redesign the kinds of behaviors that they could employ as villages to protect their village poultry. And in a nutshell, without going through all of the detail, they eventually rejected the offerings that were made by the technical experts. The technical experts wanted a quarantine station on the outskirts of the village. It's very complicated. They kept coming back to us and saying, we need hundreds of dollars and manpower to do that. And we kept forcing them to think about it more. And the solutions they came up with were low tech, they were inexpensive, and they worked for them. And they really came up with better behaviors and more effective behaviors than had been recommended by our technical experts. So now I want to move to a topic that I think we've already seen an example of with the Apple Mac, the MacBook, the positioning of a product or a brand. But positioning is something that we can also use in public health, and it has been used successfully. And yet, I think people either don't appreciate it or don't know much about it. So let's talk a little bit about positioning. So it's not one of the 4 Ps, but if you map it against the Ps, I would put it somewhere between product and promotion. So positioning is something that takes place in the mind of the consumer. Positioning is a niche that we create in the mind of the consumer. So there's not a lot of real estate there. So it has to be concise. It has to be, something that's easily retrieved from the mind of the consumer. It has to be relatable. It can be a lot like a personality. People really remember and relate to personalities. And a lot of brand positionings we find are similar to personality types. Has to be simple and intuitive, closer to that system 1 than system 2. And it's always competitive. We always look at our positioning vis-a-vis competition. And even a user, some positionings are called competitive positionings, others are called user positionings. The Apple was more of a user positioning, but in any event, positionings are always competitive because we're always looking at how we stack up next to our competition. In public health, we sometimes make the assumption, I think all too often, we make the assumption that we have no competition. Well, the infodemic has certainly shown us that we have a lot of competition, but we've always had competition. There are always behaviors that compete with the behaviors that we're trying to promote. So I think it's important that we understand that we do live in a competitive universe. So to give you just a couple of examples from the commercial sector, because I think these are fairly easy to relate to, and you've seen them, and then we'll shift over to the public health space. So here's a brand positioning statement from Aveeno. So this is how they have maybe conceived of their brand positioning. So note that they've defined their audience, not in demographic terms, by the way, but in terms of attitudes and what is that? Women who believe and beliefs. So what women, a certain kind of woman who desires a certain kind of, what is it? To have the power to enhance health and make life beautiful. They define what their brand should stand for: skin and hair transformation, the benefits, naturally healthy skin and hair, an experience. And this is important, and we've talked about experiences, so that you feel naturally beautiful. They distinguish themselves from other brands in the market, and then they provide a reason why, or a rationale why they're effective at doing that. And this is how they execute on that brand positioning. And they bring in Jennifer Aniston as someone who is, known to be authentic and natural, and seems to be the inappropriate personality to bring about that positioning. And you can see that a lot of the positioning statement shows up in the ad, but it's executed somewhat differently than the clunky positioning statement. It actually has a quote from Jennifer Aniston, so that you actually associate the brand with her. And that helps to flesh out the personality aspect of it, make it memorable, and make it fairly sticky in the mind. I think Volvo is a brand that most of us are familiar with. And over the years, Volvo has really carved out its own niche in terms of safety. And safety is not a critical issue for everyone, but there's a broad market that values and prioritizes safety. And Volvo has done an excellent job over the years of carving out that niche of being safe. I think they're running into more problems these days because other car companies are finding that they can also make safe cars. Okay, so I think we've all seen these kinds of examples. We understand positioning in the commercial space. There are many brands that we could mention: Nike, Coke, McDonald's, so many more that have very defined positionings and personalities. But let's take a look at public health. Can positionings help us? Can you actually position a specific behavior and an audience? So let's look first at anti-tobacco, and a campaign that I think is very important. If you haven't looked at it, it's an important campaign to understand and to understand what they did. So this takes us back to the 1990s, where youth smoking was on the rise. Other smoking, I think, was on the decline, but tobacco companies who had been pushed off of television we're now finding that they were pursuing youth and teens, even though they weren't supposed to. And if we look at what the tobacco companies were really putting out for youth and how youth perceived tobacco, this is kind of the image that was put out there and that youth perceived. So they saw tobacco basically, and this came out in the focus groups. This is actually what youth said at the time. They saw smoking as something that was slick, cool, desirable, something that was exciting, maybe a little bit taboo, something that maybe your parents didn't want you to do. It was kind of a naughty pleasure, kind of edgy and cool, especially for the younger kids, 12 to 15. And clearly the tobacco companies were going after a youth market, even though they were not supposed to be doing that. So the people who constructed this campaign, they had money from the Master Tobacco Settlement. It started in Florida, so they had about $20 million to work with. So they used a marketing approach, a social marketing approach. And for their positioning exercise, and they did, if you ask them, they would tell you that's what they did, is a positioning exercise. So they looked at not just what's the image of tobacco in the minds of youth, but what's the image of the people who are telling you not to smoke? So how did youth perceive those people? Well, they felt that basically the people who wanted youth to stop smoking were people like parents and teachers, maybe youth guidance counselors, nurses, in some people who were boring. So they knew what what they were going to say. It was predictable. It was not something that they were particularly interested in. So the campaign knew that they had a tough fight on their hands. So what did they do? They put together a youth summit, and they decided to, with youth in the lead, they took on the challenge of competing with the tobacco companies and repositioning big tobacco. And how did they reposition big tobacco? Something like this. The brand was called Truth. The slogan that they used is warning, similar to the warnings that you see on cigarette packages. Warning, their brand is lies, our brand is truth. So they really turned the tables on the tobacco companies. So from that kind of slick advertising, they pulled the curtain aside and showed what was really behind there. It was lies from tobacco executives, from advertising executives, who really did not have anybody's interests at heart, who were just making money, and they were making money off of a product that killed people. But what made the campaign really work and work well is that it put youth in a position of power. As you can see from the bottom stills, these were stills from some of the spots that were filmed. These were actual events that were initiated by youth and done by youth that were kind of performance art, and they made a point. So in this particular case, they brought 1,200 body bags to Philip Morris and dumped them in the front and had an event. And as you can see from the banner, talking about how many people die every day from tobacco. In another ad, they had a couple of youth calling an advertising executive and asking him if he accepted advertising for tobacco, and did he not know that tobacco kills. And so they put youth in these very powerful positions of kind of sticking it to the man, sticking it to these big corporate entities, and showing them up for what they really are. And the campaign made a big difference. It was well evaluated, and in the first 2 years, it had showed a dramatic decrease in smoking rates, especially with the younger cohort. 20% reduction among youth. I think it was 13 to 15, and then a 10% reduction in the slightly older youth. So let's shift to another example. So here's, now just to acknowledge, when we showed those determinants before, not everything was done through communication and the social mobilization effort. There were other factors that came into play over the years, and we have to acknowledge that. So the tobacco companies were restricted in how they could place the product. Pricing went up. They had to put warning labels on the product. They couldn't advertise on television anymore. And we could also look at the various behavioral determinants. But the tables were really flipped through the Truth campaign, so that the stronger voice really started shifting over to anti-tobacco from tobacco.